Well, welcome everyone to our first net zero webinar of 2026. If you haven't been to any of these net zero webinars before, then you can catch up with them and I'll share a link in the chat later. We did quite a few webinars last year. They were started by the Guildford Net Zero team, and then we jumped in and joined with them and Chichester as well. So we want these net zero webinars to be really informative, really helpful, helping you and your church in your journey towards achieving net zero carbon. If you have any suggestions for webinars, topics, things that you would like us to find out, bring in a guest speaker for, bring in some case studies for, then do let us know. Either drop it in the chat here or get in touch with our net zero teams in any of the dioceses that you are part of. We would love to hear from you. We are developing the 2026 schedule at the moment, but it's quite light. So we would like to add some more webinars to our list. We don't want to keep regurgitating the stuff that we've been doing already. Having said that, next month's webinar will be not a regurgitation, but a repeat, a similar repeat of one of the webinars that we did last year, from audit to action. So it will be a little bit different to last year. So you can catch up with last year's, but obviously this year's one will have a bit more content, a bit different case study and that kind of thing. I will post links to the Net Zero webinar pages and some of the events that we talk about later today in the chat throughout the session. Today, we're going to be hearing from Steve Collins, who just recently became the National Church's decarbonisation lead. He was with us as our Net Zero program manager for Portsmouth, Guildford, and Chichester. But Steve is here going to be talking about grants and funding, which I imagine is why most of you are here, because we all want to know about grants and funding. We're also going to hear from Martin Carr, who is a Guildford Net Zero project lead, project engagement lead. He's going to be sharing a few things. Plus, we are hoping to have, in fact, we are going to have a case study. I've just seen him in the participants list. We weren't sure he's going to make it. Dave Curran from St John Stoke is going to be sharing a case study from St John Stoke Church. And Dave is from the church that we will be gathering together for this Saturday at our Net Zero conference. And I'll chat about that later in the meeting. I know a lot of you are signed up to join us there. The bookings are now closed for that. We've reached capacity. We may be able to squeeze one or two more in, but generally speaking, we can't allow any more bookings, which is really great. It's going to be a full conference, going to be a great day, and we look forward to reporting back on that later next week. So I will crack on and hand this first session over to Steve, and I'll come back to you afterwards. If you have any questions for Steve, do drop them in the chat, and we will come to them when we get to the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself?
Great. Happy New Year, everybody. Good to be back with you, albeit wearing a new hat. And I'm just going to share my screen with you. And bear with me a moment so I get to the right bit and press the present button. Is that showing? Can I just have a thumbs up, Matt, that's showing? Great. Good. Full screen, yes? Yeah, brilliant. Great. Okay, so the purpose of this presentation is to outline the shape of the grant support that parishes, particularly parishes, I'm really sort of focusing on the parish audience here, can expect from the national C of E Net Zero program over the next 3 years. You might have picked up in Church of England circles that we're entering into what we call a new triennium this January. So there's a new sort of program of 3 years funding for the decarbonisation work on church buildings and church halls. And I just want to say that it's absolutely brilliant that the church commissioners have provided a substantial budget for this work over this period up to and now a little bit beyond 2030. But these funds will never really be enough on their own to deliver our decarbonisation ambitions. So the outworking of the way that the way that we work strategically as a national church and hand in hand with diocese really needs to carefully target how we're going to use these limited funds in the most effective way. So there's the really sort of three strategic aims of the work over the next 3 years, which, well, probably beyond that actually, which are particularly relevant to the audience that I'm speaking to today. And particularly, we want to focus on the top 20% carbon emitting church buildings and church halls. This will be measured through your energy footprint tool submissions. And obviously, we want to help those churches understand what their decarbonisation journey will look like and help them to embed that into their existing plans, and particularly want to channel some funding to them to help them develop and deliver those decarbonisation projects for their buildings. We do also want to support the remaining 80% lower emitting buildings and church halls, again, to understand their journey and provide them with some partial funding to help them along the way towards decarbonisation. And finally, I think there's another third really key opportunity is that when old gas boilers and oil boilers are coming to an end, trying to use that opportunity so that we're not locking ourselves into another sort of 10, 15 years of emissions from fossil fuels if there's a good alternative available. So why are we particularly focusing on the top 20% of highest carbon emitting buildings and church halls? Now, I don't know how much of this graph you can see in terms of the detail, but basically this is the churches along the bottom, percentage of churches and their contribution towards the carbon footprint. This is nationally. This isn't diocesan material. It's a sort of amalgamation of all the EFT across the country. And you can see that graph is not a straight line. And the red line goes up at the 20% point. And you can see if you then sort of see where my arrow is, I think you can see that, I'm not sure, and where it is crossing the curved line and then go across to the vertical axis. And you can see that that's at 55%. So we've got nationally 55% of our buildings are responsible, sorry, 20% of our buildings are responsible for 50% of the emissions from churches. And I think actually when I was in my previous role, I think when I looked at this for Guildford and I looked at it for Chichester as well, that figure of 55% is even higher. So I think in Guildford, when the year's data I was looking at, that actually we can target 80% of our emissions by just working with the bottom with the 20% churches. So it gives us that opportunity to focus on fewer churches and have greater impact. So as I think I've touched on already, it's important to note that there will not be sufficient available funding to support all churches to get all of the way to net zero. That would, if we were focusing on this 20%, that would be 3,700 church buildings. So what we want to do is to have some pragmatism, and we'll tend to work particularly with this coalition of the willing, the people who really want to go along this journey and are desperate to get some resourcing, rather than trying to spend a lot of time persuading people who are going to be difficult to explain, to win over, or they just might not be in the position for other reasons to start on this journey yet. That being said, the remaining 80% of churches are still responsible nationally for 45% of the emissions. And the programme wants to help all churches make some progress on decarbonisation. So therefore, we'll have a range of support available for these churches alongside access to some smaller grant funding, which I'll go over in the next slides. So what does a good decarbonisation project look like? Well, I think, first of all, it's got to reduce energy usage, which also immediately reduces energy bills. This can quite often mean transitioning to electric heating, and switching to a low carbon tariff. And the decarbonisation journey and the speed will be different for each church. It depends on how the church is used, the heritage considerations, affordability, and maybe other building projects going on as well. So phased processes are expected to address different areas of building at one at a time, maybe to enable manageable fundraising, or to align with other reordering building work that you might be wanting to do for other wider missional reasons. And also some parishes are finding that they gain confidence in fundraising and project delivery by developing a smaller initial phase before moving on to something a lot more complicated in the later phases of their journey towards net zero. I find as well that people quite often jump straight into asking about solar panels. And I think solar is a means to make running costs of all electric heating systems more affordable, and hence can be an integral part of affordable decarbonisation schemes. But I don't think the national team will be particularly keen on supporting a solar scheme that wasn't part of that a wider plan to get towards net zero. In this context as well, I want to say that some of you have already been involved in the National Church Demonstrator Project. And this project, we've learned a lot from this, and it may have inadvertently created the impression that the program expects churches to take this huge jump to net zero in one step. And that often is just not the case. So the demonstrator project was seeking to do a very specific thing, establish good exemplar projects around the country, which demonstrated that you could get a long way towards net zero. And so inspire others, not expecting everybody to make those huge leaps in one go. So a good decarbonisation project, I think I've touched on this a little bit already. It will deliver for the heritage and the architectural aspects, the affordability, keeping our treasurers happy, and the finances looking good. It's going to work well for the use of the building for a wider missional purposes, and as well the whole decarbonisation aspect as well. So, just going back. So really what we're looking is the ideal projects are delivering for all of these different things. So now I'd like to take you through some of the financial support that will be available from the National Church of England to support parishes over the next 3 years. And this is a portfolio of funding available, grant funding for all churches and some targeted churches, so some targeted funding for this for specific groups. Across all programme grants, parishes need to demonstrate that there's a commitment towards progressing towards net zero. And this means that we're looking now in future that as standard, they will be at least registered for a Roche's Eco Church. They will have completed their most recent energy footprint tool. The one for last year's data is now just opened, and hopefully your diocesan teams are publicising this. And that also that there's diocesan support for what you're proposing to do, so that we can sort of see it fits into sort of the wider context as well. So a form for this letter for support will be provided in due course, and it's just going to be consistent. It's going to be quite simple just across all the different sort of grant sizes, grant schemes that are coming up. So Matt, we can share this presentation afterwards. So I just want to sort of give the basic gist of what will be available in the coming 3 years. So this is funding that's accessible for all churches. There are maximum amounts that are available under the schemes that are up there per building category, per triennium, and exclusions will apply, which unfortunately I don't have time to go into all of those details today. So last year, in the previous triennium, some of our churches were able to access what was then called the Boiler Hardship Fund. And this fund and its aims are really going to be rolled into a new, what's called decarbonisation church grant scheme. And there'll be an opportunity for similar funding for those churches with oil or gas boilers that have reached the end of their lives. And as with the boiler hardship scheme, this will provide support towards the additional cost of installing a low carbon heating system compared to if you just replaced your boiler with a like for like gas or oil system. So the funding for that, all the technical advice technical advice will be available in kind, and it's the limits, the total limit of the in kind advice. That's sort of for things like project development, some technical services that you might need is up to £15,000, and the capital grants as well go up to £45,000 for that additional cost. Now, funding above 25,000 will depend on the deprivation index in your particular area. We're really sort of trying to help those churches which might not be able to raise funds so easily from other sources. And within the new grant scheme, actually, we'll also be willing to look at supporting churches who have previously installed an electrical heating system, but it's just not delivered as expected. So this is something new and will come under the new scheme as well. There's two further schemes, some of which one of or both of them you might have heard of already. There's the Quick Wins grant scheme, which will be administered by the diocese, and something called Give to Grow Green as well. I'm going to deal with those in just a little bit more detail as well. So the Quick Wins, this is basically a scheme for giving out small grants for just the sort of works which actually just allows a decarbonisation scheme to get going. So the things that we've been funding for that across the diocese, and Matt and David and Martin chip in, but it's been things like LED lighting schemes. We've also funded something towards infrared schemes as well, secondary glazing, insulation, draft proofing. I don't know if there's other things that folks want to chip in, but it's all of those sort of the obvious decarbonisation work. So this scheme at the moment is it's just on hold. Revised criteria will be released to dioceses in February. And then they can start drawing down the grant that they will make available to parishes in April. And the parishes can apply to their local diocese. Dioceses have discretion on certain aspects of grant administration. So one of those, for example, is do they give the maximum amount of grant available, but then they'd only be able to give maybe 2 or 3 grants a year, or do they cut that down? And I think in a number of dioceses, we've been giving out grants of around about £3,000 on average, so that actually we can fund more parishes overall. Now, Give to Go Green. I don't think we haven't in Portsmouth, Chichester, and Guildford worked on this yet, but it's a match funding scheme that parishes can go for, and where they've got a project which is up to £20,000, and a project that really can start reducing a church's carbon emissions. So typical types of things, it can be draft proofing, pew cushions, insulation, maybe even a small solar scheme, those sorts of things. And for every £1 donated by an individual to a parish fundraising scheme, the Give to Go Green campaign will donate an additional £1 up to £10,000. So total project of £20,000. And this scheme builds on the work done by the National Giving Network in the Church of England in terms of digital giving. And so Give to Go Green will work with existing sort of contactless schemes and online giving schemes through a giving platform called Give a Little. And this is already used by thousands of churches, and yours might be involved in that. So Give to Go Green, there have been some pilots already around the country, and some of the lessons that have been learnt for that are incredibly encouraging. And I think the three headline messages that come out of it is do not underestimate the potential of community fundraising. So even parishes in low income areas have been as successful at reaching their targets as those in more wealthy area. 98% of the churches in the pilots reached 100% or even exceeded, in many cases, their fundraising targets. And this is the one that's really exciting for me, is that actually speaking about fundraising and increases giving, not just for individual projects, but actually in the future. And on average, churches that took part in the pilot projects, this was actually, sorry, last year, increased their giving by 280% online and 70% in contactless for the 6 months after their net zero fundraising project ended. So it had this roll-on benefit for wider parish finances. And of course, the parish fundraising does not necessarily just mean fundraising from just congregations. Churches are at the center of many communities, and so getting people out into the community to develop, people out in the community are often very, very happy to donate towards parish schemes. So what's the plan for the rollout of this one? Applications will open, and again, applications will be at a national level at the end of Q2 this year. There'll be 2 grant assessments this year, moving to 4 next year. For a parish to complete an application, they'll need, again, a supporting document from their diocesan net zero team. So really, really important to keep in touch with your diocesan net zero team in terms of your intentions on this and other schemes as well. Now, funds are limited. So on average, I think in 2026, a diocese should expect to have 2 or 3 successful projects to go to the national grants panel. More funding will be available next year, and the number of successful applicants per diocese probably can be picking up from that point of view. And we may actually be able to unlock some further funding into this scheme, because this type of scheme is very, very attractive to other external donors. So what might be most appropriate for you? Well, quick wins is best for churches that have a more immediate need. You're not having to go out there and sort of plan a big fundraising campaign. It's simple, a very simple way to support steps in your decarbonisation plan in a short space of time. And it's probably easier for you at the beginning of a decarbonisation journey as well. And the application process requires a lot less effort. So better for churches who have got less in the way of volunteer capacity. Give to Go Green can be a great way to inspire generosity in fundraising and engage the wider community. It's good for kickstarting larger projects as well. There is a need there for at least 2 volunteers in your church to be able to set up the systems. Training will be given from that. And from application, the assessment of funds to then receiving the grant, it's a 4 to 5 month process. So you've got to have, even if you're a small congregation, it is possible, but you've got to have some people who are willing and have got the passion to sustain through this period. So now I'm moving on to the targeted grants. These are not for all churches. This is as per the earlier slide. And as we said here, this is the people who are in the top 20% of the highest carbon emission buildings nationally. This is from churches and church halls as well. We don't know exactly where the threshold is going to be at the moment. It's just still to be confirmed, and it should be certainly. But we expect that any church whose EFT is shows you've got a gross tonnage of carbon dioxide above 10 to 15 tons, anything above that will fall into the eligibility criteria for this. And also, if you have already been involved in the church demonstrator grant, you will be eligible if you've been invited to apply, or if you're in stage one, so that you can actually carry on your journey and get funding from this scheme. This scheme will be a lot simpler and a lot more agile to meet the needs that you're facing. So the scheme is highly adaptable to the stage at which your church finds itself in its journey. And if you haven't had one already, enables you to access an enhanced energy audit, and then support to undertake more detailed technical assessments, plans, costings, and it can include all sorts of things in terms of project management costs, if you're needing structural engineers, a heritage vice, all those sorts of things as well. And then so you can get in-kind advice from approved contractors who've been through a vetting process at a national level, and you can also sort of get grants for your own sort of project development and locally incurred costs as well. And that's up to £15,000. And then when you've got a fully spec'd and costed project, you might need to move to getting some fundraising support. Again, that can be provided in kind. And then, of course, there's the capital grants as well for actually undertaking the work. And if you're taking a phased approach, i.e. you're taking a substantial step towards reaching net zero, but some more work will be done after that, you can get up to 25% of the eligible costs, up to a maximum total grant of £50,000. And if you're going all the way to net zero in one jump, that increases to up to 50% of the eligible costs, up to a maximum of £80,000. So in many cases, co-funding will be necessary. And an important aspect of you going out to other fundraisers is that these funds from the National Church can either be secured initial funding, so you can say to a fundraiser, we've already secured this amount, or you can use them to sort of fill the gaps at the end as well. And for a phased project, the expectation is that when we enter into a new triennium in 2029, if you still meet the eligibility criteria, you will have access to another allowance of funding as well. So, yeah. So my final slide here, actually, I think we'll leave questions to the end, won't we, Matt? But I do just want to mention that some of you who you should know if you fall in this category, if you had one of the fully subsidized energy audits as part of the round one scheme, you should have already heard from your diocese whether or not you'll know whether you fit in that category. But if you do, you will have access to a £3,000 grant from the National Office. Now, I think in Guildford, most of those grants have already been claimed, but I know in Chichester, there's an awful lot that haven't as well. I'm not so sure about the other dioceses as well. Also, we can bring this up in conversation later on, that we have got access to funding for a regional net zero fundraiser as well. We'll be working across 5 dioceses for this. So there will be opportunities where we can use that fundraising resource to help groups of dioceses of parishes to access funds for work as well. We're not exactly sure yet how that will look, but we'll have to be quite agile. It isn't that we can go around supporting individual parishes multiple times, but there will be some extra capacity in the system there. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you,
And
Steve.
I realize I've gone over time. Sorry.
That's all right. So yeah, just for the sake of time, We'll do a short Q&A at the end of the webinar. But if you do have questions, I know Brian, you raised your hand. If you could drop your question into the chat, we'll either get to it at the Q&A or some of us might be able to answer it as we're going along, which we have done for a couple of questions already. Thank you, Steve. Martin's now going to be sharing a short presentation with us.
Thank you, Matt. And I notice the word short is perhaps helpful because I'll try and whiz through this
Trying to imply too much there, but
as
yeah.
quickly as I can. Let me just go to my slideshow and share the screen. Matt, give me a thumbs up that you can see that. Great, thank you. There are some useful questions. Keep those questions coming. As Steve said at the end, the Church of England funding won't cover the entire costs of any of the projects that you're going to be undertaking. It'll just be a small amount. And in fact, no grant funder really is likely to fund the whole project. And indeed, it would be very rare for the PCC to be able to afford a whole project on its own. So in a normal situation, you're going to be raising funds from a number of different organizations or indeed from within your community in a number of different ways. And rather than doing this in a haphazard and kind of, untimely way, it's really helpful, I think, to have a plan in place about how you're going to raise the money to fund your project and in what time scale. So in this presentation, I'm just going to zap through a sort of worked out example with an imaginary church called St. Agatha's in which it could have been in Guildford Diocese, and how we might put in place I guess a smart plan, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So let's imagine the brief. St. Agatha's a Victorian church in a busy town centre, as well as services. The building hosts community groups, music performances, has a cafe, and a food bank is running there. High running costs. The heating system is old and doesn't work very well anymore. The PCC have joined Eco Church and they've decided that they'd like to install a heat pump and get solar panels to support that, support the running costs to better heat the church and enable their mission to move forward. They've also got ideas to add secondary glazing, put some LED lighting in to complete the work that they've started on that, and insulate the community room, which is used for the food bank. So how are they going to plan the project and how are they going to fund it all? There's the hardworking vicar of St. Agatha's. Really important before you start your fundraising is to define your project. Funders won't respond well to we're thinking about getting solar panels or we might get a heat pump. They'd like to see, I'm sure, the true costs, that you've done your work, you've got a contractor in place and you've got a plan. So where do you start? Of course, with an energy audit, perhaps some consultancy work, appointing a project manager and contractors who'd like to do the work. Be aware of all the costs which are going to be involved in the project and also what permissions you're going to need, whether that's local authority planning or faculty permission. And if you haven't started, it's worth starting again, getting those permissions early so that they're in place so that when the funder says, well, have you got permission to do this? You can say either yes or we're very close to it. It's not going to delay things. So in the case of St. Agatha's, they're preparing the budget of what their project might cost, and you can see the various elements just set out there on the screen, totaling 130,000. So that's the money they're going to have to find in order to realize the project. So they are putting together now, in some sense, the other side of the budget, which is where the money's going to come from. The PCC in this case have pledged, let's say, £20,000. The church warden has given a legacy that can be 10. So they're going to have to raise £100,000. So that's where their fundraising plan comes into action. So the PCC decide that it seems realistic to them that they could raise 30,000 through community fundraising and £70,000 in grant fundraising. Now, of course, within your community, that might be different. Perhaps in wealthy or more affluent areas, or where perhaps more people are associated with activities that the church is running, more could come from the community. But often in very deprived areas, or where the church is being redeveloped in order to sort of, in some sense, boost the community use, that initial funding might need to come more from grants. they're getting organised at St Agatha's. So they give them their fundraising campaign a title. St Agatha's Goes Green. The vicar and the church wardens are taking charge of a fundraising committee to raise funds from the community. They're looking at holding a concert, doing a sponsored skydive, and approaching businesses on the high street. Lots of things you can do, of course, and what churches are very used to doing community fundraising, coffee mornings, auctions, sponsored events. The list is endless. In this case, the treasurer, secretary, and administrator, they're going to form a grants committee, and they're going to look at possible grant funders who could give some of the money that they need. And they've also set a time scale, which is important as well, I think, rather than having an ongoing fundraising kind of thing, to say we'll try and do the fundraising in 12 months, get the project delivered following that. So what donors does the grants committee look at? Well, one of them might be the Decarbonising Churches Fund that Steve mentioned. They apply to that fund and they're successful. They get £40,000. They apply to Marshall's Charity, which is a charity that gives to churches across 4 dioceses in southern England. They apply for 20,000, and it's quite common grant outcome that the charity come back and say, well, we can offer you 10,000. They try Your Fund Surrey, which is through the county council. Success again, £10,000 coming in because that building is in great community use. The Benefact Trust, which is the charitable arm of ecclesiastical insurance, they are able to offer 5,000. But sadly, for the grants committee, their application to the Garfield Weston Foundation is not successful. But since they've applied for more funds than they actually need, the fact that one or two funds, one or two grant applications don't completely come through, hasn't held them back too much. They've managed to secure £65,000 of funding of the 70 that they need. So the two committees now take stock. The grants committee, as we said, have raised 65,000, and there's been success as well for the community fundraisers. Skydive raised 10,000, although the vicar sadly fractured his arm. The concert raised 5,000, and businesses on the high street have pledged 10,000. So they've raised 25 of their 30,000. There's only 10,000 to go, and there's 3 months of their 12-month window left. When you're close, it's a good opportunity to actually reach out again to some other funders and say, we're really close. We just need that last little bit to get us over the line. So the two committees combine, they put in a bid to the Borough Council, and they're successful in raising some money from that. A gift day to the congregation raises 5,000. A local councillor associated with the food bank is able to pledge £1,000. And actually, at this stage, the PCC say, well, there's only £1,000 to go. We can meet that additional cost ourselves. But what if they hadn't been so successful? What if they hadn't been able to raise enough money? Well, it's really good within the project to be able to take out some elements. So, for example, in this project, they could have said, well, we'll leave the secondary glazing and LED lighting until a later stage. The core of the project is the heat pump and the solar. So that's what we want to focus on. Another way to do it might be to take out a loan. And because we're hopefully saving money, because the new technologies use less energy, we could pay that loan back over time. What, of course, if the costs increase in that 12-month period, the contractors say, well, actually, the cost of solar panels and heat pumps is now higher, so we're going to have to charge a little bit more. So it's really good to build in contingency, try and raise perhaps just that little bit more. Also, perhaps when the solar panel engineers go up on the roof, they find there's some work to do to actually make the roof sound. So there's lots of things which could cause costs to increase during implementation, so it's good to have that contingency built in. In the unlikely event we raise more money than we're hoping because of great generosity, what other aspects might we be able to add into the project to enhance it and to make it an even more successful project? So again, all things you can kind of build in from that initial stage, thinking kind of, oh, this is the project we want, this is the core, but what would be the nice extras and what things can we take out if we need to? So at the very end, it's really good to put the project into action. 4 months later, the St Agatha's has its heat pump, the building is warm, everyone's really happy, and the bishop with all the donors and all the fundraisers come together for a big service to celebrate what they've done. Brilliant. By good planning, perseverance, and adaptability, St Agatha's is now a net zero building, ready to serve its community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Uh, we've got one more question added into chat, so we'll come back to that from Andy. So just to finish off this afternoon session, we want to bring in Dave Curran, who is part of St. John's Stoke Church in Guildford, which is where we're going to be having our conference this weekend. And Dave's going to be sharing their net zero journey, and how they're able to fund the changes and the things that they've been able to put in place. So, Dave, why don't you share your screen and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Nice to join you this afternoon. I'm just going to set a time and I'm going to whiz through this. I have got 10 minutes, I think. So just to say, I am no fundraising expert. I used to work in a job where I did lots of project management in the kind of audio-visual production industry. So somehow I've ended up project managing this project. I'm not quite sure how I've got to this point, but we are where we are. I'll echo a lot of comments that Steve and Martin have already made as I go through this, but there's sort of 10 key points I'll kind of bring out of our project and what we've learned so far. So the first key point is really to have that overall vision and that aim of what you're trying to achieve. Our project wasn't just about net zero, it was an overall buildings project, but we thought about it in a very holistic way as a church development project. So as something to invest in making useful buildings for our mission. And it was a really holistic approach, as Steve was mentioning. And the core themes throughout the project that we wanted to include was obviously the environment and sustainability running throughout the project. Accessibility to the building is currently quite poor, so we're trying to improve that, and the safety and security of the building. And we did this by considering our marks of mission. So looking at our love for God, our love for the community, and our love for each other. And that helped us break up the phasing of the project and then assigning this phasing to our marks of mission. And you can see it builds up to phase 4, which is right in the heart, hitting all of our marks of mission. And then the second point I'll make is about setting objectives and goals. We spent a very long time trying to phase the project, and it was a huge list of jobs and projects that we needed to complete in the church and the centre, which are two quite distinct parts. And we realised that we couldn't do it all in one go. So we've actually split it into 4 phases, and the first 2 are kind of more urgent. It's the first one we've completed already, and that was in the church. The second one is more about the centre and the external areas. And then the third is about refitting the church completely. And the fourth is about refitting the centre completely. So we've broken it up into phases that you'll notice the fundraising goals increase as we go forward. Also, the timescale gets longer for each phase, and the more works we do going forward. The third point is about funding impact areas. That's the best kind of description I could come up with for this. So the Benefat Trust, when we applied to them and we got some money from them, they have some really good areas that I've stolen and we use throughout the project, which really, really help us. So sustainability is one of those key areas. And what we did, this is an example for phase 1, is we mapped our works into these different areas for funders, and they really like that. And they really like seeing how it hit different impact areas, and it ticked a lot of boxes across a lot of different funders. So obviously we've done lots and lots of bits with sustainability, with draft proofing, destratification fans, independent reports, refitting boilers. The next category we had was accessibility, welcome and heritage. And we did lots of bits. So we installed some new doors that were glass so people could look through and make it more welcoming, secondary glazing to protect historic aspects of the building, and some new doors to stop noise transferring through. But you'll notice all these things kind of hit on the different areas, and I've just put them into this category, but they'll hit into lots of other categories. So just bear that in mind with funders, that certain impact areas different funders will want. And then another one was safety, security and user experience. So again, we fitted a fire alarm, new fire doors, external lighting to make areas safer, and some acoustic panelling to help our centre users. And then we transformed some working workspaces and meeting rooms. So this was a vestry that was just used as a dumping ground as storage. So it went from this to a really nicely lit proper workstation there. And everything we did in there was energy efficient. There's infrared heating, LED lighting. We've put secondary glazing in there. So we were considering kind of the sustainability all the way along. And the same with our bell ringing room. The bells aren't rung that often, as you can see. It was just a dumping ground, but we've transformed it into this kind of. We've redone the woodwork, put carpet in, and now it's another meeting space as well as being for the bells. So my fourth point is about funders. So engage early with funders. What we found is we make lots of initial inquiries with funders, and it saves a lot of time because sometimes they're just not the right funder for us, or they're not their criteria doesn't match ours. It saves us and them a lot of time, and often they'll recommend other funders because they're so well linked in with each other. They'll recommend other funders that we can go to, which is really helpful. Don't ever think that any fund is too small. We've applied for funding for £500, and then our biggest fund was £150,000. So all the way up, we've blended it. I'll give you some examples of the places we've gone then. So this was for phase one. We got funding from all these different places here. So Marshalls, Congregational General Charitable Trust, the VCSE Government Scheme, Churches Preservation Trust, Benefact Trust, our local council, among some. And for our phase one, we raised £135,000, of which £54,000 came from grants, and the rest was really generously raised from our congregation. My next point is about multiple funding sources. So we've already spoken about the congregation. Do consider local and national grants and small and large grants to get really blended funding. We've done quite a few fundraising activities at the church. So we've had plant sales, we've had cake sales. Our youth made all the cakes and sold them for us. We had some gardeners that wanted to sell plants, and they grew plants to sell for a plant sale, and both of them raised thousands of pounds. People are very generous when they get a product. If someone's walking away with something, they're much more likely to give more money and be generous, we've found. And then my sixth point is maximising and blending your funds. So remember gift aid with everything you do. That could be an extra 25% on top if people can gift aid it. Another really useful little site we found is ShareGift. So one of our congregation found this, and we got our treasurer to look into it. And ShareGift is an online site, and if people have shares in companies, it can be a really tiny amount of shares. So I think we had someone with about £150 worth of shares. They couldn't get it out of that company because it would cost them too much. They donated them to ShareGift, and then ShareGift sent a cheque to the church for £1,000 because they had lots of other people donating shares, but they had no match donation of where to send those shares. So our £150 donation to ShareGift, they amalgamated with lots of the donations they had and sent us a cheque for £1,000, which was fantastic. So ShareGift's a fantastic resource that not many people know about. Think about listed places of worship VAT reclaim. So anything you do on your listed building that's eligible listed places of worship, you can get the VAT back on that. So that potentially is another 20% back. Match funding. So there are lots of match funding schemes at the moment. The Big Give is quite a big one at the moment, where if you raise a certain amount, they'll match it, which is a really fantastic addition. And we did that with the Aviva Community Fund, where we raised about £13,000 through small donations, and they matched that, effectively doubled that up to 26,000, added a bit of gift aid, and all of a sudden we had £30,000 without actually much initial capital. And the last one is crowdfunding. So yeah, our Aviva fundraising was matched from Aviva, but it was a form of crowdfunding where we went a little bit wider than our congregation to the community, to our centre users, and people responded really generously to that. So we're on phase 2 at the moment of the project, and these are some of our funders for phase 2. So far, we've got £232,000 of funding. and about £45,000 of donations. And most of that funding was from the VCSE fund. We were very lucky to get 100% funding. So about £150,000 of that funding was from that fund. And I will just show you, point 7 first. So point 7 is about really integrating and embedding net zero within your broader plan, which we did. As Steve mentioned earlier, one of the most important things we did is getting an independent energy assessment report, and that gave us a really simple chart of options we were given and the effect it would have on our EPC rating, our CO2 emissions, the kind of indicative costs and the running costs, as well as the payback period. So that was really easy to see what we needed to target first, and then we applied for the most urgent things first, and we got those in the VCSE grant, luckily. And then another part of it is the Church of England have some good resources about net zero carbon plans. So we took those resources and we mapped it per phase. So it was kind of achievable for us as we moved through the projects. We knew what sustainability things we wanted to do going forward, and we were making sure that everything we were doing to the building met the goal of becoming net zero. I'll just show you a bit about sustainability. This is a nice photo. Someone in our congregation is a photographer, so he went up to the church tower and was able to take a photo of our solar with the sun rising very early one morning. So the VCSE grant we got paid for solar, 27 kilowatts of solar and 27 kilowatts of battery, destratification fans for the church to circulate the air and reduce the amount of hot air leaving the building, air conditioning in the centre, and electric heating where we couldn't put air conditioning in, and quite a big three-phase power upgrade to the road to get us more power to make that all work. And here's some of the pictures of digging up the road and the new power supply and our solar batteries. And then here's some pictures of the air conditioning that's been retrofitted into our centre, which is the most kind of efficient way to heat and cool the centre because it's a much newer building. And then phase 2, we thought, well, hang on a minute, we're doing so well on the sustainability front. There's lots of other funding at the moment. So we looked at the kind of next steps on our independent energy efficiency report, and we thought, okay, these are the next kind of 6 things we need to do. Let's look at some funding. It's about £100,000 worth of work. So we applied to the Church of England Demonstrator Fund, and we managed to get some funding for that. And we also did the Aviva Community Fund to raise funds for this. And then we had a small amount of funds that the church had raised itself to make up the 100 grand. And it was these kind of 6 areas we looked at. So we've replaced doors for the centre, doors that were drafty and not good for accessibility. We've replaced all of those. And we've done lots of insulation works on the church building in the bell tower. We've replaced our gas cooker. We realised that we turned off the gas heating in the centre, moved to air conditioning, but we still had a gas cooker. So we realised we quite urgently needed to replace that to turn off the gas properly. And we've put lots of PIR sensors and LED lighting throughout the centre to reduce our energy usage. So we've gone from kind of a G EPC energy rating up to a D. And without the church, just looking at the centre, I think we'd be on a B. But including the church as well, we've moved substantially, and our community centre is now net zero, which is a massive improvement. And we're kind of now working on the church and taking the church forward to help to make that net zero in the future. Last few points then, so 2 more minutes and I'll be done. Networking's been really important to us. Do network with your diocese. The Net Zero team have been a really great addition and useful contact, as well as your DAC secretary. They've got fantastic knowledge of the permissions, but also tradespeople and networking with other churches to see what they've done. Local councillors have been really useful in terms of working out how on earth councils work and how the planning system works to help navigate that, but also putting you in touch with other organisations and other funding that they know about. And we've got some quite generous funding from some of our local councillors as well. We network with several community organisations that use our centre, as well as eco-organisations in our town, and do keep the congregation and church users on board throughout. And then I know Martin mentioned this, do seek permissions early. Faculty permissions are like a walk in the park compared to local authority permissions, we found. If you're doing anything with a listed building on the outside, you'll need both sets of permissions. So my advice is do get a planning consultant or architect involved. We tried to do some on our own. That was a big mistake. It was incredibly involved and complex. And do get them early, so you can progress the application. Some grant funders won't even look at your application unless you've got permission. And then with the VCSE grant, we managed to get that in place while we were applying for permission. And the permission only just came through in time to complete the works before the money had to be spent. So it's not just you've got to time them carefully, not go too early that the permissions run out, but not go too late that the funding spending time runs out. Yeah, timescales and lots of permissions. And the last bit, oh, this has gone the wrong way, is about marketing and support. So keeping your congregation involved, getting a really good team around you. So we've got a buildings development team for the next chapter project, and we've got people in there who are project managers, people in there who are accountants, photographers, marketing people. So we've got a really good cross section of skills that we can utilise. And we've developed some nice literature. We've paid a graphic designer to develop some nice literature so it looks really professional. So when we send out stuff to funders, and they can see our phasing, what we've really thought about the project, and that's helped us take it further. We've also got a prayer support group where we've got a WhatsApp where every week we're sending stuff out to them. Thank you for this, pray for this, and that is really helping support us. And yeah, there's some useful sites there of the kind of 4 places we found most useful to get to identify organisations for funding. So Church of England Cornerstone that's just been launched. Surrey County Council have a good community funding page, and then Get Grants Funding Finder and Ecclesiastical Insurance. And that's all for me. I hope that's been useful.
Thank you so much, Dave. There's so much information there. Really, really helpful. And just as a reminder, those of you who are coming to our Net Zero conference this Saturday, you'll be able to go and tour around St. John Stoke, the building, and see all the works that Dave was just been talking about. And if you have any questions, particularly for the funding that Dave was talking about then, and you're coming this Sunday, do ask Dave. He's going to be around all day. He'll be taking the tour. He'll be doing again another presentation, I think probably covering some of the stuff that he covered just here again. So you'll be able to hear again what he's talking about. But if you have any specific questions, do come along and ask Dave on Saturday. We're gonna stretch this webinar just a few minutes beyond the normal finishing time, just so we can cover some questions that have come into the chat, although I don't think we'll be able to cover all of the questions. So if we don't get to your question in this short Q&A session, then do send us an email and ask that question again, and we'll try and find someone to answer it for you. I'm sorry that we can't answer every single question that's been asked. Before we go into Q&A, I just want to let you know that our next webinar is going to be on February the 11th. There's a link in the chat there for you, and we're going to be looking at audits, getting energy audits, and really looking at some of the content that we were discussing early part of last year about energy audits. So do come along to that, sign up to register your interest, and we'll let you know when it's going to be happening on the day. So if I could just jump into the chat and go back to some of the questions that were asked early on, and a question that John Darley asked, well, a couple of questions around the same kind of thing. He was asking particularly for funding, and Steve, this might be your area to answer. He was asking the funding that's available, is that per building, per parish, or per project? Same with the quick wins as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's primarily for per building, bearing in mind that each building would need to have its own EFT figures that fit within any criteria for a scheme. And there's a bit of a grey area sometimes about whether a church hall is separate or adjoined to a a church, I think if obviously if they're on different sites, completely separate building, each eligible. If they're sort of clearly separated, again with their own EFT figures, so it would be per building, but there is a little bit of a grey area there sometimes. I think in terms of the quick wins, again, these funds are limited, and the diocese will, they wouldn't necessarily want. I think they have some say in terms of, would they want to give a disproportionate amount to one parish or one set of projects? I think, so again, I can't comment so much on that, but technically speaking, from the national office, that would be okay to give to, separate buildings and separate projects. Another question, I've got them written out here, but you keep on going
Yeah,
through them.
so Dave has very kindly answered a couple of questions that were specific to St. John's building, so in the chat. So if you want to catch up on those in the chat, you could do so. But there was another building, and I think I can guess the answer to this, is that from Andy, is that can matched funding be retrospective?
I don't think so.
I don't.
No. And I think again, with all of these things, with all the projects, it's really important to get all your approvals in place before you start spending and doing the work.
Yeah.
So that's just standard sort of grant management right across the sort of the industry, really.
Brilliant. I think actually we've covered all the questions, either here or Dave's answered in the
There
chat
were a
as
couple of
well.
others that I had in terms of somebody asking, I think again it was John, about, the parish owns a house.
Yes.
Would that be eligible? I don't think it would be, unfortunately. Not the grants that I'm talking about. Again, worth looking at government grants, whether or not your house will qualify for the government warm home scheme, which is currently on the go. There was also a question around whether a church building, which is in somehow sort of owned by a trust charity, would be eligible. I think the key things here, I can't exactly answer that question, but I think the key thing here is it owned by the PCC? And has it got its own energy footprint tool data? Are you submitting that? Those will be key things. But beyond that, it's probably a little bit of a grey area.
Yeah, thank you. I think how essential the energy footprint tool is, it can't be understated. I think it's, I know we've
Absolutely.
talked about it every time we come on and do these webinars, get your energy footprint tool done. But this is why we say, because if you're in that top 20% within the diocese, then we as a diocesan team can help you direct you towards this extra funding. So, the energy footprint tool opened at the beginning of this week. So get it done as soon as possible, because the earlier you know, the easier it will be then when it comes to applying for funding and achieving grants and all that kind of stuff. And as a diocesan teams across all the dioceses, we want to be able to look at the data that we get back and help identify and understand who are the top emitters, who do we need to be directing our particular funding resources towards, and we will be doing that over this coming year. Brian's got a question. If you could ask that question really quickly, Brian, that would be really helpful.
Actually, it was Gareth's question. I just wanted to raise attention to that one. So Gareth
Oh,
asked,
sorry. Yes, I did have that one down. Yeah,
yeah, great.
but this is the Give to Go Green one. And what about sort of a project which is above £20,000? I think the key thing here is that the Give to Go Green, if you get into that scheme, the match funding would only be up to a maximum of £10,000. So I know some of the projects that were successful were in the pilots were above that. I think as well, it's sort of there's something I'm not actually going to be administrating this scheme, but it's something about, there's a certain type and size of project they're going for. So if you're sort of going for a mega project, a bigger project, 60, 70, something like that, and I wouldn't necessarily put this one in, but be savvy about how you define and how you communicate about your project. So you could have actually sort of various projects going on in a building, and you just sort of package this one for Give to Go Green, and this one for other sources as well. Or you can do phasing as well. So, I would tend to sort of keep it in the, sort of 15 to maximum £30,000. And then beyond that, yeah, be savvy about the way you package, segment, and communicate.
Thanks, Steve. That's really good. Nick has just asked a question. Secondary glazing, does that include glass porches or glazing a lady chapel? Don't know if you're in a position to answer that.
Interesting, because I think again it's how is this going to affect your carbon emissions? And I think there's quite a lot of lady chapels where that services are held in them, and actually then if the glazing enables you to sort of zone that area and heat that part of the building, or the more efficiently dealing with your heating, so that you're keeping the heat in areas that you're using rather than having to heat a whole building, then that's great. And so it's that demonstration of how this is going to reduce your carbon emissions, your costs, make the building more warm and comfortable in the areas that you're using it. For porches and things, again, it's how is it affecting the main building? In my church, we've got sort of a need for better porches because we've got these horrendous through drafts that are going through, and it's affecting the whole church. So yeah, it's how it fits that bigger aim, which I think will be important. And I think for those sort of projects, again, those are great for your quick wins. If it's part of a bigger scheme, again, potentially a give to go green, but it could fit in within in a wider sort of phase project for some of